Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Becky Dixon, president and owner of Airplay Productions, began her career in broadcasting at KTUL-TV in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she was both a news and sports anchor. In just 6 years, she was hired by ABC Sports and became the first woman to host a network sports show, joining Frank Gifford as co-host of ABC's Wide World of Sports. Dixon served as a broadcaster for the Super Bowl, Winter Olympics, World Gymnastics Championships, college football, and the Triple Crown of horse racing. She also co-hosted the Dallas Cowboys' Jerry Jones Show. Dixon later returned to Tulsa and founded Dixon Productions, launching the television special Oklahomans. The show was statewide, promoting and celebrating the achievements of many well-known Oklahomans. In 1994, Dixon joined forces with communications pioneer Ed Taylor to form Airplay. Becky is considered a pioneer woman in the broadcast industry and tells her story on the oral history website and podcast, voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling. Today's date is June 14th, 2023. So, Becky, would you state your full name, please?
Rebecca Elizabeth Lynn Dixon.
I might say that we're recording this interview in the studios of voicesofoklahoma.com. Your birth date?
4/14/51.
Making your present age?
72 years old.
Where were you born?
I was born in Coffeyville, Kansas, which is right across the border from Oklahoma, because I was raised my entire childhood in Oklahoma, but Coffeyville was the closest town with a hospital.
Where in Oklahoma were you raised?
Nowata County, so South Coffeyville, Oklahoma. We were just 10 miles, our ranch was 10 miles from the Kansas border. And I was raised on a ranch in northeastern Oklahoma, a large family ranch. It's now been in the family for over 100 years. I went to school, in grade school, in Coffeyville, Kansas, because that was the closest Catholic school, and that was where we went to Mass. And then I later changed to Lenapaw High School, which was in Oklahoma. So I sort of had two states growing up, because many of the things that we did as a family, and it was a bigger town, was Coffeyville, Kansas, but our address was Oklahoma.
So growing up on a ranch, you did ranch work, I suppose? They put you to work?
Oh, yes. I was the oldest of 5 children. We had many hired hands that worked for us because it was a large ranch, but also my dad made sure that every morning we were out the door, usually helping him with ranch work, as opposed to helping my mom, who had to feed all of these ranch hands and children. But most of the time, I was outdoors helping my dad.
Did you take to horses and riding horses? And all that?
Yes. Because there was ranch work to be done every single day. You know, cattle didn't know when Saturday or Sunday came along, so there were no days off. But yes, I grew up. I don't know if you've ever watched Ree Drummond's Pioneer Woman cooking show, and you see her children out helping their dad every day with ranch work, but that was much like my life.
Do you think that you, as you grew up, you drew from some of that experience living on a ranch?
I think hard work definitely came from my roots on the ranch. I mean, we worked hard every day. My dad, I don't recall him, especially when he was younger, ever sitting down except to eat one of his meals. He was a very hard worker, and on the ranch, we worked hard every day. Oftentimes, I can remember oftentimes galloping through the pasture at 5 a.m. and watching the sun come up, because during the summer especially, we like to do the ranch work early because it would get so hot. And then many times, we watched the sun go down as we put our horses up that evening.
When they saw you on Wide World of Sports, they had no idea you were a rancher's daughter.
They didn't know I was a cowgirl.
Cowgirl, right. Your mother's name?
Betty Ruth Lowry was her maiden name.
So where did she come from and grow up?
She spent her entire life on the ranch. The ranch was and was her family's ranch. There were 4 brothers who came with their father from Tennessee and established the ranch in Oklahoma. And out of those 4 brothers, there were only 2 children born, my mom and her sister. So they inherited the majority of the ranch. And when my mom married my dad, he was the 19-year-old farm boy from Kansas. He grew up in Kansas, but he had to learn ranch work very quickly.
Your mother's personality, what was she like?
She was a saint.
Well,
She was a saint, and that was her personality. She was not a critical person. You know, she had 5 children, but she raised us by her example, and she was just a wonderful person. She also was a very hard worker. She was entirely responsible for feeding everyone on the ranch, and she never knew how many people were going to show up for breakfast, lunch, or dinner on the ranch. She was a wonderful seamstress. She sewed many of our clothes and curtains on the ranch, bedspreads. I mean, she could make anything. She was the Martha Stewart of ranching in northeastern Oklahoma.
did you pick up on any of those skills?
Definitely not the sewing, and no, I didn't really. I think I'm a pretty good cook today, but I learned it more after I left the ranch.
Yeah.
I didn't learn it from my mother. I like I said, I was too busy out on the ranch helping my dad.
And your dad's name?
Harry Charles Lynn.
And then he grew up in Kansas?
He grew up not too far from Coffeyville, Kansas, on a small farm near Liberty, Kansas, and he went to high school in Coffeyville, Kansas. Coffeyville was the larger town of those small Kansas and Oklahoma towns at that time.
How would you describe his personality?
He was a very hard worker, strict disciplinarian in that, you know, he wanted each of us to do the right thing, and he made sure that we knew what he thought was the right thing. I learned so many things from him. He was a character. He had many ranch hands come and go on the ranch over the years, and they all said to the person, it was the hardest job they ever had, but it was also the best job they ever had.
They learned a lot, didn't they?
They learned a lot. And he made sure everyone who was around him learned a lot, and he had plenty to say and plenty to teach. And to this day, I can still open a gate with the best of them.
And that takes a skill?
Well, if you do it by his book, it takes a certain skill. He had a specific way he wanted everything done, and that was how he wanted definitely his children to do it.
Well, he probably impacted many, many lives beyond his imagination.
Oh, he did. My parents were killed together in a car accident in 2005, and over 900 people came to their funeral. We had the funeral together at our Catholic church in Coffeyville, and many of those who came were his former ranch hands. And that's how I knew how they all, years later, felt about him.
About the accident? How did that happen?
My parents were coming home from Coffeyville to the ranch. It's about a 10-mile drive. Somebody was driving 90 miles an hour on a country road and hit them. And they were both killed instantly. It was 2005.
What a shock.
I really don't have the words to describe how shocking it was and the grief that followed for our family, because, you know, it was like a candle being snuffed out, and all of a sudden they were just both gone.
Wow. Who stepped up on the ranch then to take over?
My oldest brother. I'm the oldest, and then I have my next brother is Charlie, and he runs the ranch. He's worked on the ranch every day of his life, except when he went to college at Oklahoma State. But we still, you know, love to go to the ranch. It's like my husband says it's like my drug when I go there, because it always makes me feel wonderful, and I'm filled with so many memories. I went there a couple of weeks ago, and there's no place more beautiful.
Yeah. It's great that it's still in the family. And do you look at the future? Are your brother, did they have children? Are there youngsters that'll probably continue on?
We don't really know. My brother has 2 daughters. I don't think either one of them are interested. We don't really have a next generation that's really interested in ranching. I'm hoping some will develop along the way, but right now I'm not sure what the future of the ranch holds, but I know it will always have the most special place in my heart.
Well, you and your brother still have a lot of living to do, so
Well,
you can enjoy all
yes,
that.
and he's, like I said, he still works there every day.
Okay, your education. Where did you go to grade school?
The Catholic school in Coffeyville, Kansas, Holy Name School. I went there up until 6th grade and then switched to Lenapaw High School, which was in Oklahoma, Nowata County. And the reason I switched is because Coffeyville Holy Name School did not go into middle school and high school. I think at first they went up to 8th grade, and then there was a shortage of nuns, and so I know the school is still there, but I'm not sure what grade they go to now. But I switched over for middle school at Lenapaw High School.
Okay, and your faith in the family in your religion and Catholicism must have been really strong in the family, since they made sure you were attending a Catholic school?
Yes, my mother drove. Like I said, Coffeyville was 10 to 12 miles from our ranch house. And, by the time she got to the school, it was probably, let's say, 15 miles. So she drove 60 miles a day just to get us back and forth to the Catholic school. My father was the Catholic. My mom converted. But yes, it was very important to them that we went to the Catholic school. And then my younger siblings did not go to the Catholic school. My oldest brother and I did. Then by the time they started to come along, the middle siblings, my mom had to make a decision. Did she leave to take some of us to the Catholic school in Coffeyville, or she had to get the others to the school in Lenapaw? So at that point, we all switched to the Lenapaw schools.
Mm-hmm. In high school, what was that experience like for you? Were you active in many activities, or?
It was a small school. There were 50 students, around 50 students in my graduating class. I played basketball. There weren't a lot of other activities for us. There weren't clubs, so to speak. There was 4-H and FFA and FHA. FHA was Future Homemakers. I was not really involved that much with any of those.
Was sports becoming of interest to you? You said you played basketball. Was that a part of your life? Big part, small part?
Not as much as sports that evolved around ranch life. For instance, rodeos or competing in horse shows, things like that. I was more interested in those, although I did become interested in basketball. My mom had played basketball. So that was kind of a sport. That was really the only sport available at the time for young women at that school, because like I said, it was a very small school.
What year did you graduate?
1969.
So then what do you do?
University of Tulsa.
Was that a no-brainer? Did you hesitate? Did you shop, or how did that come about?
Well, I never wanted to leave the ranch, first of all. But of course I knew I needed to and wanted to go to college. So I chose the college that was closest to the ranch, and that was the University of Tulsa. The other one I considered was Oklahoma State University. My mother had gone to Oklahoma State. So I considered that, but I had a strong history in Tulsa because my grandmother had 3 or 4 siblings that lived down here. So we came to Tulsa often. I was very familiar with Tulsa, and I liked Tulsa. And it was close to the ranch, and I could go home on the weekends if I wanted to.
Let's name your grandmother. What was her name?
Her name was Lila White Lowry.
All right, so at TU, what will your degree be in when you graduate?
Education and a minor in journalism.
Okay, and why?
Education, because I could see myself maybe becoming a teacher someday, but I didn't have I wasn't completely sold on that idea. Journalism, because it was something that I can't say that I was really interested in pursuing a career in journalism, but I liked reading, I liked writing, I liked the skills that it took to minor in a journalism degree.
So there's nothing tracking in your mind right now about what could possibly have been your future. So that's not even in your wellhouse at this point.
No, not at all. Like I said, I really thought I would probably end up on a ranch someday, whether it was staying at my own ranch and living there. I was just so happy growing up on the ranch and being with my family. Our closest neighbors were my grandmother and cousins, and they were 3 miles away, and we were all on the same ranch. So that was my, pretty much my entire life, and I was very happy there. So I didn't grow up dreaming of a career. And when you think about it, in 1969, young women didn't really track that way, at least the young women in my life. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But when I got to the University of Tulsa, I did become more interested in pursuing a career, and I did my student teaching at a school here in Tulsa, and I liked that. It was in 6th grade. Then I was a teacher for a year in 1st grade, but then I became pregnant. And then I was married and became pregnant with my daughter, and I thought, I'm not really sure that I can do justice to children all day and then come home and do justice to my own child. And that's when I started to think about a career in journalism.
Okay, I've got to come back.
Okay. I know this can be confusing.
To cowboy boots.
Okay.
You must have worn and own a bunch of cowboy boots.
Yes.
Do you own any today?
1 pair.
Do you wear them anywhere?
I wear them sometimes. If I go to the ranch, I'll wear them. If I go to Pawhuska, I went there recently, I wore them.
Sure, yeah. Well, you deserve to be able to wear them. You earned the right.
I think when I interviewed Reed Drummond, I wore my cowboy boots that day. It depends on the occasion.
And this is a unique experience. You have an interviewer interviewing an interviewer.
Yes.
And so, but it works out fine.
And I realize we're jumping around a little, but I did not have a linear life. I didn't start with the plan and end with the plan.
You taught for a year,
mm-hmm.
and then you decided to stay home for a while?
Yes, I wanted to stay home with my daughter, which I did. And then, like I said, I began to think about a career in journalism because I felt like that would be a little more flexible than showing up and teaching every day.
Right.
So I literally talked my way, and I came up with the idea of sportscasting for a woman because there weren't really any women doing that.
All right. So you were watching, obviously, sports on television.
Some.
And was there anybody you saw, or the concept came while you were watching television, more than likely?
Yes. Well, I watched Wide World of Sports with my grandmother growing up some because she liked some of the women's sports, like figure skating, gymnastics, skiing, things like that, tennis. A lot of the sports that, I went on to cover on Wide World of Sports. So there were women athletes at the time, that were experts, let's say, in a specific sport, but not necessarily women journalists covering sports. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like, let's say, a Peggy Fleming.
Right.
Who was a wonderful figure skater.
Yeah.
She covered figure skating for Wide World of Sports.
Right. But certainly you didn't think, Wide World of Sports, I'm going to be there.
No, never. I didn't think that until the day they told me I was going to be.
And so we'll get to that. So you have this idea of TV sports. Mm-hmm. What do you do with that idea?
I take it to Channel 8.
And who did you call? Did you just walk out?
I called Chris Lincoln, who I had met before. But Channel 8 was so innovative at the time. I thought they just might buy this idea. I was familiar with the Lake family that owned Channel 8, and they were doing so many different things in sports. In addition to the nightly sportscasts that they featured, like everybody else, they also were producing coaches shows, like the OU coaches show, OSU coaches show, tennis tournaments. They eventually got into horse racing. But Mr. Lake had a vision that was just beyond anyone else's at the time. And I could see that. And I think, obviously Chris Lincoln as well, who dominated the sports market at the time. Channel 8 did. So I decided to start at the top.
That was the era of Eight's the Place.
Eight's the Place, yes.
And we have on our website Nancy Lake,
Yes.
Seven Oaks. We've interviewed her about her father, and then she gave us a interview that Jimmy Lake gave. It's about a 30-minute thing that we have on our website as well. And it's pretty remarkable when he talks about how he brought television here to Tulsa. And
the Lake, like I said, the Lake, I had the good fortune to work with Nancy as well as Mr. Lake over the years. When I got to Channel 8 and in the ensuing years, we were the #1 ABC affiliate in the country in terms of market share.
Wow.
That didn't happen by accident.
No, but they had such great, Bob Hauer was the the news anchor. Don Woods. I've forgotten some of the female news people.
Beth Rangel.
Yes.
Beth Rangel.
And before her, too, there were...
Beth was there when I got there.
Okay.
Beth, and then Diana Moon came along
Yes.
pretty much the same time I did.
It was one of those perfect storms with all this talent.
All the talent.
And when I came in 76, I was very aware of all that was happening. And, of course, watched Eight's the Place. You called Chris Lincoln or said, I'm in the lobby, or how did...
No, I said, I want to come see you because I have an idea. So he set up a meeting with Tom Goodgame, who was the general manager, and that's another name I have to mention. He was the general manager, and he also was very innovative, very creative, very open to big ideas, new ideas. I'm not saying my idea was a big one, but it was definitely new at the time. And Mr. Lake. So I came out to the station and told them what my vision was. And my vision was, because like I said, I wanted to still have time to spend with my daughter, and I was hoping that I could create a position that would give me some flexibility. And so I proposed doing 2 stories a week for the nightly sports.
Okay, and what was their reception to that idea?
Okay, let's try it, I think was their first idea. Let's try it.
Immediately.
And see how it works out immediately, yes.
Because you came with no experience.
No.
Radio, television, nothing. And not even hired professionally writing for anybody.
I came with an idea, and that was it.
And they, yeah. So then...
But they didn't have that much invested in the idea. They said, we'll try it.
Right.
So...
But that was a big door.
It was a big door.
So then, what was your first? Did they want you to do an audition? Did they want to see you on camera first, or how did that work?
I don't think so. I think I just did a story. I think I introduced myself in the first piece and told them the things, that I might be covering. And the other idea I had is that I would participate in some of the sports. If I was doing a story on tennis, I might play tennis with the person I'm interviewing. Or if I'm doing a story on, maybe a girls' softball team, I might throw a pitch. Or it was also, my idea was to participate in some of the sports. Mr. Lake loved, get ready for this, bowling and fishing. I could bowl, I could fish. So I learned that in that first meeting because he thought that there was entirely too much basketball, baseball, and football on the nightly sportscast. He wanted to see more bowling and fishing. So great. I thought, well, I can do that.
How long were the pieces?
A minute and a half.
Yeah. And so your first one was about?
Me. Like I said, I think I introduced myself and said, obviously part of my idea included more women's sports.
Okay.
So I said I would be covering women's sports and participating in sports and, whatever. I can't remember exactly now what I said, and then I'm trying to think now what my first actual story was. I think it was some kind of a high school girls team, maybe softball, something like that. But I like to think that the idea worked out okay for both of us, and it just sort of evolved. And as anyone will tell you in a television station, I'm sure radio probably was not that different. If you're there and are doing a good job and willing to work hard, you're going to get more work. Yeah. Because somebody's always taking a vacation, or somebody wants time off, or somebody's ill that day. So there are opportunities for you if you're doing a good job and if you're working hard. My first big opportunity I felt came when Nolan Richardson was at TU and was the basketball coach and did such a phenomenal job. And that first year they went to the NIT, which was a bigger tournament at the time, in New York. And for some reason, none of the sportscasters who were ahead of me, Chris, Carl Arkey, Bob Carpenter, I came about the same time, so we were kind of on equal footing. But for some reason, they had other responsibilities and could not go to New York for that, to cover that tournament. So I got to go. I did a pretty good job, and I think I convinced them then that I could handle live coverage, traditional male sports, and so that opened some doors within the station for me.
Well, and then it just so happens they won the NIT.
They won, yes.
And
yes.
We'll all remember that downtown celebration when
yes.
the whole town came downtown right there in that square, and I was there. And
it was a wonderful
event
for Tulsa and for my alma mater, TU. And it was just wonderful all the way around. And I remember I got to be good friends with Nolan. And for some reason, I took him. He came out to the station when they got back for an interview, and I ended up taking him to the back to the airport. And I remember telling him, I said, if there's anything you want at this time, now's a good time to ask for it. Whether it was, more whatever for the team, or, just your vision for what you want in the future for this team, you should ask for it now. And he agreed.
I'm just thinking about you and the confidence you must have had in yourself. I could never have done what you did. I mean, I just worked my way in slowly. But here you are, and then you're in New York. Had you ever been to New York before?
I had been once.
All right.
But it was, of course, an entirely different situation. I'm at Madison Square Garden, the sold-out crowd, my hometown watching. I mean, obviously, I wasn't a part of the broadcast, but I was there, to do all of the interviews post-game and to do preview pieces before the game. The first thing I found out the hard way was that Madison Square Garden allowed only union camera operators into the building. Oh, we didn't have a union camera operator in Tulsa. So we had to kind of figure that out. And I think sometimes it helped because I was the only woman, obviously, there covering things. And I'm not saying I was able to talk my way in because I was a woman, but at least I think it might have helped a little.
I'm sure. Right.
I said, please, we didn't know.
Well,
I'm from Oklahoma. I don't know what excuse I
then
used.
You have a pleasing personality and all, and that worked for you, and so they allowed you to broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. That was something else. And then to walk into Madison Square Garden, which you had never been in.
I'd never been.
Yeah.
No.
And to do that, you must have gotten lots of good compliments back with Mr. Goodgame and Mr. Lake.
Yes. And Bob Gregory, who is probably to this day was one of the most talented broadcasters, writers, journalists that I ever worked with, he complimented me when I came back. And he was a very gruff kind of person and certainly did not hand out compliments quickly or easily. And he complimented me, and that meant a lot to me when I came back from New York, and I think that gave me a big boost in confidence.
If we could hear God speak, it would be sounding just like Bob Gregory.
Exactly. Or with that authority.
Yes.
For sure. For sure.
Yes. I had a good memory of him going to lunch with him one time, and we had a good time. So something must happen then after that experience in New York. Do you get other assignments?
I get
or-
more assignments, and I think they have obviously more confidence in me. And being a woman, was a unique position, and I think they saw that was beneficial to the station. Unique in that I wasn't just another man covering sports. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So perhaps maybe people, especially women, maybe paid more attention.
We talk about Ree Drummond being a pioneer woman. You are a pioneer woman.
People often ask me how I felt, especially in the early years, how I felt about being a pioneer for women. And I never really knew how to answer that question because I wasn't sure how many women would follow me. But today, I'm so happy to say you can tune into almost any sporting event and see a woman on the broadcast team. And that makes me very happy.
Oh, and ESPN, I watch them every morning at 6 o'clock, and we've got all that. You laid the groundwork for many of them. There's no question about that. You're having more and more assignments, and let's bring you up to probably something that was pretty important when an agent showed a tape of your work to somebody.
Yes, I got a call from Jean Sage. She was an IMG agent, and that was a huge agency, and she had some really big name clients. One, John Madden, I remember, was one of her clients. Somebody had sent her some of my work. I resigned from Channel 8 because, again, I had a son, so I have two children.
Let's name, what are their first names?
Jennifer Dixon and Dan Dixon.
Okay.
And I really felt like I wasn't doing justice to my children. By that time, I was working full time and had other assignments at Channel 8. I also had a daytime news show that was every day called Dayline. And that was a news show, and I did 3 live interviews on that show every day. It was their version of a noon newscast. So I resigned from Channel 8, and again, I'm thinking, I want to continue my career, but I need more flexibility. So I thought I think I can get some freelance work. And ESPN was just coming into being something significant at the time. So I thought, well, maybe I can do some work for ESPN. Maybe I can there was another big sports production company called Ms. Lou. I'll contact them. So anyway, I did get some assignments, especially in the beginning from Ms. Lou. And one of those was the Senior Bowl football game in Mobile, Alabama. And that was a game, it was kind of an all-star senior game. So the top players from that year played in this Senior Bowl. And it was produced by the NFL, so it had NFL coaches. So that was a pretty big opportunity for me. I was the host of the Senior Bowl and did the sideline interviews. So I think that's where Jean actually saw my work, Jean Sage. And then I think she asked Bill Schwing, who was the head of Ms. Lou Productions, what he thought of me and to send a tape to him. So that's how that came about. And Jean Sage contacted me. I love the fact that she's a woman, and because there are very few women broadcast agents at the time. But Jean was one of, obviously one of the very top, and she worked with a lot of sports broadcasters, and like I said, John Madden being one of them. She called and said, I think I can get an interview for you with all 3 major networks, if you'll come to New York. All 3 major networks being ABC, CBS, NBC. ESPN, like I said, they were just starting out, but they were becoming more and more significant, but they wouldn't have been considered one of the top 3 at the time, surprisingly. So I said, okay. And it just so happened that I had another event, I think it was a women's golf tournament that I was doing for Ms. Lou, the company I mentioned, somewhere in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. So I said, okay, I'll be on the East Coast this date. Could we set up the interviews sometime around this time? So she, true to her word, set up an interview for me with all 3 major sports networks, all in one day. So I wake up in my hotel room that morning and look at the sports news, and the headlines read, because my first interview was with the new president of ABC Sports, Dennis Swanson. He had just taken over for Roone Arledge. New ABC president fires O.J. Simpson and Joe Namath from Monday Night Football. It's the first thing he did. I thought, oh, great, this guy's already in a bad mood, and now I have to go meet with him. Fortunately for me, though, he wasn't in a bad mood. We had a great interview. He told me later he really liked me as a person, and that was one of my selling points, he said. And I did have the interviews with CBS and NBC, but within a couple of weeks, I had my first assignment with ABC.
How about the other two networks? Did they come back to you at all?
Yes, but I because of Wide World of Sports, and I felt there were more opportunities for women there, and that was just one of their shows. And again, I felt like Dennis Swanson had some of the same personality and some of the same vision that I had found at Channel 8 in James Lake and Tom Goodgame. He had big ideas for the network.
Did everybody have some hesitancy? We know we're hiring the first female and all this, and we don't exactly know how this is going to go over, but we don't care. Was that part of any discussion?
I don't recall that as much. Some of the only I'm going to say this. Some of the only pushback I got, it was from some of the men that I worked with, because I think they thought that maybe I got more opportunities because I was a woman. And maybe I was the first one Dennis Swanson, the new president of ABC Sports, hired. Well, let's face it, they were all three looking for a woman by that time to add to their
so the idea was in their head.
It was in their heads, yes. Yes, it was in their heads. And Jean told me that, now that I think back on that. Yes, they were all three considering, I mean, this was 1986.
Yeah.
So they knew that they needed to do that.
All right, so then you're hired by ABC. What is your first job?
It was a Wide World of Sports event. It was a made-for-TV event in Lake Tahoe, and it was called the $1 Million Race. It was a long-distance race, and somebody had put up $1 million. There was $1 million to go to the winner. And I did a profile piece for the live event, and it was a young man in Arizona. They sent me to Arizona to interview a young man, Native American, who lived on a reservation, and he had stuttered in school and had several instances where he had been made fun of because of his speech, and so he would run away from the kids who were taunting him, and that's how he began his running career. And so they sent me to Arizona to do a piece with this young man who had learned to run because he had felt like he needed to run away from those that were taunting him. I think I did a good job, and that, of course, was a piece that was so appealing to people because it was just such a nice, warm story that something good could come out of something that was a negative in his life. I got to work with some of ABC's top people. Marty LaCory, who was, of course, an Olympic track star. Donna DeVerona was there. She was obviously a swimming Olympian, and Diana Nyad, who was also a swimmer. So anyway, I got to work with some of ABC's top people who normally, and when I mentioned Diana and Donna, they worked specifically usually with their specific sports. This was kind of a fun event, and it wasn't swimming, even those two women were known as swimmers. It was a fun event, and so I think they just brought in a lot of their people to work on that. So I did some interviews and live interviews during the race and afterwards. So I think that event worked out pretty well for me. Then the next assignment I was given for ABC was a halftime piece for college football. And it was a Scholar Athlete of the Week. And so each week I would go to a different campus, university campus, and interview a football player that was also not only a great athlete or a football player, but also was exceeding in academics as well. One of those I interviewed was Brian Bosworth.
Really?
And that's really not, I think that was not something that was known about him at the time, that he was a very, very good student. To this day, his personality and all of the circus that kind of surrounded him overshadowed the fact that he was a very good student.
Right.
Okay, so there we are. Now we're at college football season. I'm doing halftime pieces, taped pieces, not live.
Mm-hmm. But did you do sideline reporting then, beginning then?
Well, I did a couple of games that year and the teams were already set. We had 2 broadcast teams for football, and we had people like Keith Jackson and Lynn Swan and Bob Greasy. So, those 2 teams were already set. But it was during the World Series that a couple of these people that were on the football team left to go work on the World Series. So I got to fill in for 2 games that fall. That was my first fall. One of them, happily, was the OU Texas game. And Barry Switzer was the coach, Brian Bosworth. A lot of the sideline stories that I did pertained to those 2 characters. I call them characters because they were, but they were also the dominant features of OU football at the time. And then the next week, because we were still in World Series season, I went to Texas A&M, and I think it was Texas A&M and LSU, maybe.
You said World Series season. Oh, and
World Series because the other people were gone.
That's right.
The other people were gone. So that gave me the opportunity, and that sort of, up to that point was a hallmark of my career. When people that were ahead of me in line to get an assignment had to go do something else or had other responsibilities, and I was called on to fill in, those were great opportunities, but they were also opportunities in which I needed to really do a good job with.
Were you ever nervous?
Looking back, I wasn't as nervous as I should have been. Sure, I was nervous. But like I said, I don't think I was as nervous as I should have been. But especially early on, I think I didn't seem to really have nerves those first few games.
But when those personalities left and they were sideline reporters, here you become the first female sideline reporter, and that was historic when you first did that.
Right.
Any reaction from anybody?
Surprisingly, no, this entire time there wasn't, like I said, I would hear rumblings about it with some of the males that were my colleagues that I worked with. I think even though they liked me and we got along, but I know there were some rumblings that I would get assignments because I was a female.
But somebody at ABC said, no, we want a female. We know we're going to make history here. They had to think that. And so you were doing such a good job, they knew it was time to make history.
I think they knew it was time, but they didn't put that pressure on.
No.
They didn't apply that pressure to me. They didn't say, oh my gosh, you're the first woman, so you've got to make us look like we knew what we were doing.
No, and I can understand that, but back in their thinking, I'm sure that's true.
They had to be thinking that.
Right. So these assignments come along. Then, don't you actually get to be on ABC's Wide World of Sports?
So the timeline I'm talking about now, since we're talking about World Series in OU, Texas, this is October. In November, Dennis Swanson called me to New York, and I'm still living. Okay, here's one of the things I loved about what I was doing at that time. I could still live in Tulsa and raise my children during the week and usually go off, on the weekends for assignments. So this is working really great for me. I'm able to do a good job at both of the things that were so important to me, and nothing was more important than raising my children and making sure they were okay and well taken care of, and that I was able to be there for them. So this was working great for me. But in November, Dennis Swanson called and said, I'd like you to come to New York. I have something I want to talk to you about. And so at that meeting, he said, we would like you to host Wide World of Sports this year, all year. And Wide World of Sports was from January. This is November. The season for Wide World started in January and ran through up until football season, up until the 1st of September or end of August. And we will put 3 different co-hosts with you. You'll start out with Frank Gifford. the first several months. Then the next several months, I think it was Jim Palmer, who was the baseball player. And the third one was Al Troutwig, who was a journalist, broadcast journalist for ABC, that was doing a really good job. He was very creative and kind of had a great sense of humor, but he was very good on air. So he would be the third host, but I would stay with it the entire season. It was not required that I would move to New York, but I had to be in New York every weekend. And that required me to, I think I would usually fly in on Thursday, and I would always come back Saturday after the show. There was one flight I could get back to Tulsa on Saturday after the show. But this sort of turned my world at home upside down, because now I have no flexibility.
Yeah.
And now I'm, gone from home 3 or 4 days a week.
All right. They asked you to be on Wide World of Sports. Can you imagine when you walked out of that building and went out on the street? Did you go, Yahoo?
With Frank Gifford.
Yes.
And Frank Gifford is Frank Gifford. At the time, he just married Kathy Lee, and there was a lot of publicity about the two of them. And Frank Gifford, like I said, was Frank Gifford.
How was he to be around and work with?
The very best. He was the best. Such a gentleman, so kind, mild-mannered. He was the best.
And it's unusual, maybe at that point, such a gifted athlete for the New York Giants.
Right.
And then he also had the charisma to be a performer on top of that.
Yes.
And ABC struck gold again, having somebody like that who was very popular and very likable on television. It's nice to know he was very likable off television.
Yes. I can't say enough about him. And he was, so kind and welcoming to me, and he always made sure that I was comfortable with whatever it was we were doing. I can't say enough about him. And it was a fun time to know him, because, like I said, he had just married Kathy Lee, and she had her own New York show at the time. It was not national. It was Regis and Kathy Lee, but they were on the ABC affiliate in New York. So, and of course I got to know Kathy Lee, and she was a very interesting character herself.
Well, she must have been interested in you beyond that, because you were from Tulsa and she went to ORU.
She went to ORU. I'm sure there are some women, newly married, might have been a little anxious with Frank and I working so closely together. And Regis didn't make things easy. I know I was in my hotel room in New York one day, and my picture was on the cover of USA Today sports section that day. Becky Dixon and Frank Gifford, new co-hosts of Wide World of Sports. And Regis holds up the paper and to start the show and says, well, there's a new woman in Frank Gifford's life. And you know how he liked to stir things up like that. So,
right.
But we actually became good friends.
So how long does that continue on Wide World of Sports, and the agony of defeat and all that went with it?
Well, I stayed with ABC from 1986 to 1990.
So when you were in the business and you're in New York and you were really focused, there's only female, and then you had all these men around you, were you ever harassed as a female?
I have a couple of stories to tell that are somewhat related to your question. One was, I was at the Senior Bowl game in Mobile, Alabama, and this was very early in my career. And there was an event the night before. The game was sponsored by a men's club. I can't even remember now which one it was. A men's club in Mobile, Alabama. And the night before the game, there was this big banquet, and everybody was invited. All the players, the coaches, and the sponsors, and the men of Mobile were invited to this event, this dinner and event, and all the players would be introduced. And before that event, they told my producer, now you know there's a problem that she, pointing to me, can't come. Well, why can't she come? Well, because women aren't allowed. And my producer said, well, she has to come because it's very important that she knows who the players are, because she's going to be the one interviewing these players during the game. And it's very important that she gets to talk to them tonight, maybe learn something about their story. No, she cannot come. My producer, much to his credit, said, well, if she can't come, then the rest of us won't come, and we'll just pack our bags and go back to New York. So the men of Mobile said, okay, well, let us think about this. So they conferred among themselves and came back and finally said, okay, she can come, but she better not wear a short skirt. Of course, my only regret was that I didn't have a short skirt with me. So anyway, that was one instance where I wasn't necessarily harassed, but it was a very sexist thing for them to do. And another time, this story has always been kind of conflicting for me. I was at the Final Four basketball tournament, and there was a very famous coach there that I was sent down to interview. And they said, no, my producer back in New York said, no matter what, you come back with this interview. He's not doing interviews, but you need to get an interview with him. So we went down there. I went up to the famous coach and introduced myself, and I said, I've got to have an interview with you. And he was kind of nervous about it, and I could tell, but he knew my producer. And so I threw out his name, and he finally agreed to do the interview. So we did it in the lobby of where they had been holding the press conference, and he wasn't doing any other one-on-one interviews. And all the big basketball broadcasters were there, but I got this interview. So at the end of the interview, and he was very nervous during it, and you can tell he was kind of uneasy. I don't know I didn't know why he was uneasy, but I could tell that he was. And so I was trying to get through the interview because I had to get it, my group had to get it up on satellite and get it back to New York so it could air on the program that was coming up in about an hour. So anyway, we did the interview, and when we got up, I thanked him, and he kind of patted me on the rear end. I don't think he ever really knew what he was doing. And it was like he would do his team, when they went off back onto the court. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Sure do.
And so he did it unknowingly. I was in such a hurry that I just kind of went on. But I had a producer with me. My on-site producer was a woman, a New York woman, and she got very upset about it, more so than I did, because I felt like he didn't consciously know what he was doing. But anyway, so she told the president of ABC Sports about it, and he called me the next day, and he said, I want you to know you don't ever have to put up with anything like that. He apparently called the head of the NCAA, and I think the coach was, I won't say reprimanded, but I think he got a phone call. So anyway, that was another instance. But like I said, I was conflicted about it because had I thought he intended to do that, I would have had an entirely different reaction. But the following year, I did another interview with the same coach when we were at his school for a football game. And so he didn't want to go. The night before, my fellow broadcasters that were with me went out to dinner with him, and they said he didn't want to go if I was going. So I said, I don't want to go to dinner, but I would like to do an interview with him at halftime of the football game tomorrow so we can talk about the upcoming basketball season. So he agreed to that.
So was that okay then when he was with you and
yes.
talking?
Yes. And neither one of us mentioned it. So those are two instances where like I said, I wouldn't say I was harassed, but I did find out later, and I will say this about the coach, that he was very uneasy around women. He did not like being around women because he used a lot of foul language, and he felt very uncomfortable that he might slip up and say these words in front of a woman. Mm. Those were his words.
So out of your entire career, which was quite long, and largely then in a men's world, very few instances of...
Very few instances. I was treated almost entirely with respect. I was really more upset with the men of Mobile for being that way, about not wanting me to come to the dinner and then saying I could come if I didn't have a short skirt on. One of the problems that I had was that midway through that first year, I could see that I couldn't keep up the pace of flying to New York every weekend. And they also added another show called, I think it was called Monday Sports Night, that they asked me to host, so they added that show. It was going to be I think just a summer show. But that required me to stay in New York until Monday, and then it required me to go out on the road and do a piece for that show. So now all of a sudden, my dance card is very full, and I'm not getting to spend enough time with my children. So I talked to Dennis about moving to New York. I said, I think I need to at least try this because and he had said to me, actually it was the vice president of ABC Sports, Dennis Lewin, said to me one day at lunch, he said, "You look very tired." And I said, "I am very tired." It was, it was a huge role and a huge opportunity, but there were sacrifices I was having to make with my family, and I've just never been able to make that sacrifice.
So then does the family move to New York?
So we moved to New York. My children and I moved to New York, and we live in a great apartment near the ABC studios. Bob Iger, who went on to become and is chairman of Disney, was our vice president of promotions at the time. He and I were about the same age and had children about the same age, so he helped me with camps and things like that I was trying. I was trying to figure out a life for my children in New York. So he suggested a camp. This was summer, so we moved up in the summer. So I sent the kids to a day camp in Westchester, and they would go there for 2 or 3 days a week for camp. But again, then there were a lot of obstacles in raising 2 children that had grown up in Tulsa and grown up with the ranch, an hour away and having grass under their feet. And now we had nothing but cement under our feet, even though we live fairly close to Central Park. So,
how old are they about this time?
Okay, Dan is 3 and Jennifer is 8.
And then a school. They must have helped you get in.
School, yes. So there were just so many obstacles to face with that, with living in New York. And I decided after that summer, actually, that I would go back to Tulsa. That was easier than keeping them in New York.
So how long did you live in New York?
We lived in New York that summer.
Okay. All right. That was enough of a test.
That was enough. That was kind of what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I wanted to test. But my family and support system were all back in Oklahoma.
Yep.
Back in Oklahoma, I had my mother, my siblings,
yes,
their dad.
You must have had some help in New York.
I had some help in New York, but it was help that, we were unfamiliar with. I know the first day I came home from the studio, and again, it was just the children and myself. I had hired somebody from a service that I'm sure Bob Iger had recommended for me. When she got there, she wasn't fluent in English. And when I got home that day, Dan was crying, and I asked Jennifer, I said, "What's wrong with Dan?" And she said, "I don't know, you'll have to ask him." And so I asked him, and he said, "She froze my man." And so somehow the miscommunication led to her putting Dan's little plastic army men in an ice tray and freezing them, and Dan was crying about it. So anyway, I have lots of stories like that to tell. But so anyway,
it was time to come back to Tulsa.
It was time to come back to Tulsa.
Right. I know we're jumping around, but at the time you became the only female college sideline reporter. At that time, the National Football League did not allow sideline reporters at all.
No.
Men or women.
They didn't. And this is a funny story, and again, we're going to jump around a little bit, but when I had my first interview with Dennis Swanson, and he had just fired O.J. and Joe Namath from Monday Night Football, one of the questions he asked me was, "Well, what do you think you'd like to do for us?" And I said, "Well, I think you need somebody on Monday Night Football now." But of course, sideline reporters weren't allowed, but he kind of liked the answer, I think. No, there were no sideline reporters, male or female.
I've forgotten. Why did he fire O.J. Simpson and Joe Namath?
He just thought they weren't doing a good job.
And who was that? When Howard Cosell came on then? Maybe?
No, Howard Cosell was before them.
Okay.
So that following, after he fired O.J. and Joe Namath, it was just Frank Gifford and Al Michaels.
That's right.
The following year, he added Dan Deerdorf.
All right.
So they went back to the 3-person booth.
Yeah.
And now, of course, excuse me, but you can see sideline reporters on Monday on all NFL football, and it's almost always a woman.
It is always a female, mostly, yes. And were you able to get the stories, obviously, that those in the booth didn't have? Wasn't that make you feel good? Were the coaches open to you, probably not as much as they are today, for your reporting during a game and pick up on information?
So that following fall, I'm named to one of the college football teams. Like I said earlier, we had two teams. The A team was Keith Jackson, Bob Greasy, and Lynn Swan. The B team was Gary Bender, Dick Vermeil, who was a Super Bowl winning NFL coach, and myself. I was the sideline reporter. So that year, ABC had the Big Ten and the Pac-10. Most of my games, because the Big Ten wasn't as good as the Pac-10 that year, so the B team got those, and I was the B team. Most of my games were in the Big Ten. But we had a lot of Ohio State games. Michigan State was really good that year. Michigan, of course. And it just so happened, John Cooper, who had been at the University of Tulsa and who was a good friend of mine, was the coach at Ohio State.
So he was open to interviews anytime?
He was open to interviews anytime I wanted. And his wife was a friend of mine also, and she was always in the stands. I think I interviewed her one time. I would say the coaches were always really open to talking to me, and I don't think they looked at me as a woman as much as they looked at me as someone just trying to do. But normally the coach interviews would come maybe before the game, but for certain after the game. And again, it would all depend on the amount of time we had left. Sometimes it was 30 seconds. Sometimes it could be 3 or 4 minutes.
Well, as a sideline reporter then, were you trying to, what were you saying? What were you reporting?
I noticed they're not doing this as much, but we were trying to add a lot of color to the game. You know, college football is a big, colorful event. There's a lot going on. There's the band, there are the cheerleaders, there are, all these different things going on at a college football game. So we tried to, there's a lot of tradition to talk about, especially in a place like the Big Ten, where they've been playing football forever. So we would try to bring a lot of color to the game, in addition to injury reports was certainly something, that we were responsible for. If someone was coming off the field and had broken a bone, they would look to us to give as much information as we could find out about that specific injury. Maybe something we overheard on the sidelines. Let's think about that OU Texas game, and I'll talk about that since this is Voices of Oklahoma. Here are some of the things I talked about during that game, and that was obviously the year before because I didn't do it the second year. Brian Bosworth's hairstylist, because remember he had the rainbow-colored hair?
Yeah.
I interviewed her about how that hairstyle came about. I interviewed a young boy that Brian Bosworth, a young boy who had a very serious illness and was hospitalized much of the time here in Tulsa, I think it was then the Children's Medical Center, and Brian befriended that boy and would often go to see him. So I interviewed that boy and his father. So those were the kinds, some of the kinds of stories that would be of interest that weren't necessarily pertaining to the specific events that were happening on the field.
Right, but it added a great dimension to it.
A great dimension to the event.
Right.
So now I'm in the Big Ten. Most of the time I did have one game that year in the Pac-10, and I'll never forget it because it was in October at Arizona State in Tempe, and it was 118 on the field that day.
Wow.
It was hot. And I had to be prepared at any given time to cover a game that was maybe snowing and 10 degrees, or that was the other extreme, of course, was the 118 degrees in Tempe.
Were you enjoying it? Were you having fun?
I did enjoy that. I did. I didn't like the extreme weather, obviously, but yes, I liked the college football.
There's a tremendous amount of tension that must have come to you in the public. Maybe you go out in the street and whatever, and there's Becky Dixon, and they want to talk to you, and you were in New York. All that went on, didn't it?
Some of it, yes. A lot of it. It seems like the student sections especially in the Big Ten, where they all were getting used to me because I was there almost every weekend that season. They would chant my name when I would come around to maybe where the student section was sitting.
Ask for autographs and all that came to you. So that had to be fun.
It was a good time.
I think you also had the Super Bowl experience, Olympics, and Triple Crown of Racing. Is that right?
Yes. During my years at ABC, we broadcast some of the top sporting events in the world. And I'll just start with the Super Bowl. It was the Washington Redskins against John Elway and the Denver Broncos. And the Denver Broncos were favored, and primarily because of John Elway and his incredible talent. But the quarterback for the Washington Redskins that year was Doug Williams, who many in Tulsa will remember playing for the Oklahoma Outlaws. And the Washington Redskins won that year, and Doug Williams became the first African-American quarterback to win a Super Bowl. So that had special meaning for me because I had met Doug during his years here in Tulsa. One of the things I will remember most about the Super Bowl was this incredible pregame show, and it wasn't as long. I think now they do pregame shows that last all day long before the game. Ours was either an hour or 2 hours, but we featured reporters from around the world because we utilized some of the ABC News incredible news talent reporters. I broadcast on the pregame from an aircraft carrier that was in the harbor in San Diego, and I talked about how the sailors were getting ready to watch the Super Bowl and they were all out swabbing the deck. Then we had somebody across the border in Mexico. We were in San Diego. We had somebody across the border in Mexico. We had a news reporter in the Middle East talking about what the soldiers there were doing to prepare to watch the Super Bowl. And we had a camera in China outside a bus or subway station. But anyway, Keith Jackson and I produced most of the pregame show and wrote some of the pieces. But anyway, it was a lot of fun, and it was great to see how the entire world was preparing for the Super Bowl.
Right. I would imagine you scored an interview with Doug Williams. Did you?
No, because we did not have time. And so much in television depends on time. No, there was limited time after the game. I don't think that we did any post-game interviews.
Okay, but you brought up the name Keith Jackson that we all loved. What was he like to be around?
He was really incredible. I loved Keith and had the good fortune to work with him during college football. I did several games with him, and he was down to earth. He was just such a solid person. I really loved working with him, and he, of course, so knowledgeable and so well respected.
Yes.
In the industry. I mean, everybody knew and loved and respected Keith Jackson.
I can hear him in my head. And
yes.
The better part of Valor says, don't try to imitate him, John, because you can't. But we all loved his performance.
And when I say we helped produce the pregame show, we weren't listed as the producers, but I know we worked on it with the producers because Keith was just so talented. I mean, he could do anything. He could write. He had the football knowledge and, of course, the contacts that he had made throughout the years.
We forget about that some of them are writers. Just because they can perform may not necessarily be a writer, and we forget that. And so he was a writer.
He was a writer. In fact, I think everybody I worked with at ABC Sports focused a lot of their time on making sure that what they had to talk about was written well.
Okay, right. Super Bowl, unless there's anything else. Olympics?
The Olympics followed almost immediately that year after the Super Bowl. In the Olympics, it was the Winter Olympics in Calgary.
What year again?
This was 1988, the Winter Olympics, Calgary. I had been to Calgary several times before that to do preview pieces. I hosted Wide World of Sports from Calgary the year before, saying, it's 1 year to the day when we will be in Calgary for the Olympics. And I remember those early visits because I got to utilize some of the, skills and talents that I had utilized at Channel 8 because as I had said, I like to participate in some of the sports that I was talking about. So I remember in that pre-Olympic visit, I skied down the downhill mountain very precariously and only turned around, and I never fell, but I did do a 180 and completely turned around one time. And it was on one of the easier slopes for sure. And then at the end of that preview show, I rode in on a horse and talked about the Western heritage of Calgary. But it was so the Olympics 1988, it was so cold in Calgary. I wasn't used to that kind of cold. And I was there a month. We were all there a month. The Olympics usually last a couple of weeks, but for all of our preparations and pre-interviews, we had to be there 2 weeks early. I covered skiing. I covered speed skating. I did some of the color pieces. I did quite a few interviews. And I remember one interview stands out all these years later the most because I opened the show that night with this interview. It was a really emotional interview for everybody involved. It was with Dan Jansen, and he was favored that night to win a gold medal in speed skating. He was from either Wisconsin or Minnesota, where most of the American speed skaters were from. But his sister had died that day from cancer, and he was really close to her. But he wanted to go ahead and skate in her honor. And so we opened the show that night. Jim McKay was our Olympic host, and he introduced me and said, Becky has a very special interview tonight. He was so emotional, as was, in his entire family, most of his family, I would say. Of course, some had stayed behind with his sister, but most of his family was there. So I did the interview, and then sadly he fell during the competition and did not win a gold medal that night. So that memory will always stand out the most. And, as I look back on the Olympics and the Super Bowl and some of those larger events that I covered today, I didn't realize at the time, I don't think, the significance that they had in the world or in my career, because you're so focused on what you're doing at any given moment, as you have to be. But today I look back and I'm proud that I was able to be a part of those events.
Oh, yes. But as soon as you said Dan Jansen, and I haven't heard that name in a long, long time, I knew exactly what you were talking about. That's how much it was impressed on all of America.
Yes.
That we remember that story. I'm glad you remembered him. That was great.
I need to Google him and see how he's doing today. I hope well.
Yeah.
He was such a nice young man.
So now you brought up Jim McKay.
Yes.
About him. Was anything different, unusual about him, or he was so good too?
He was so good. And I didn't work with him that much. I did work with him on the Triple Crown of horse racing because he was a horse racing fan, and he also owned, I think, some horse races or was a partial owner of some horses that raced. Frank Gifford and I replaced him on Wide World of Sports, so he was pretty much retired, but he did come back for the Olympics and for the horse racing. But again, such an incredible talent, such a nice man, very low key, and very focused on what he was doing, obviously.
And he would call those races. He was so good at it. He actually granted an interview for me at KRMG.
Okay.
So we could talk about an upcoming race, and we had him do a little bit of a call and so forth. So that's how a nice guy he was. Could have ignored Tulsa, Oklahoma, but he didn't.
No, that was not his personality. He was, seemed to love everyone he met. And I think that was one of the reasons that he was so popular on the air.
We've been talking about you being the only female pioneer. So through all this reporting, Super Bowl and Olympics so far, are you basically the only female?
At the Super Bowl, I'm the only female. At the Olympics, I was the only female journalist. Now, we did also have like Peggy Fleming for figure skating. Donna DeVerona, who worked on all the Olympics, who was an Olympic swimmer, even though this was the Winter Olympics, she was there to do some interviews. She did some interviews. I'm sure there were others in some of the specific sports. But I do specifically remember that Peggy was there, Donna DeVerona was there.
But they were experts in their field.
Experts in their field,
but
yes.
You pointed out you were the only female journalist.
Journalist, right.
So you're still a pioneer woman, even under there. So then under the Triple Crown of Racing, what was your experience?
That same year, so now we go to May. Yes, that was my first Triple Crown experience. Primarily, I worked on the pre-game or the pre-race programming for that. Well, we started at the Kentucky Derby and then went on to the Preakness, which is, by the way, I'll mention the Preakness. It was the only event where I had to have 2 bodyguards. I remember that.
Why was that?
I don't know if it was I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think just maybe the area where it was, it was maybe a higher crime area. Now I really can't remember, but I'm sure that was probably it. And then the Belmont, which is one of my favorite races, was the final race in New York. I did do a piece for the Kentucky Derby. I'll never forget this. It was a great piece on the long shot, who ended up coming in 2nd or 3rd. So that was nice to have that happen.
Did we have a Triple Crown winner that year, 1988?
No, I don't think, no. No, I would have remembered if we did.
Right.
But I remember being with Jim McKay on one of those telecasts, and I can't remember which one it was, but I think I still have the video of myself with Jim McKay. I will say one other thing about the Olympics. I was down at the bottom of the ski slope one day, the downhill slope, and getting ready to interview skiers when they came down. And I heard, and it's a very chaotic scene down there. There are cowbells ringing, there are people and fans screaming in all different languages. And there's just a lot of noise and a lot of chaos down there. But all of a sudden, I could hear this voice in the crowd say, Becky from Tulsa, Becky from Tulsa. And I thought, who in the world is that? And so I looked around, and in the crowd, I could see this friend of mine, Brad Petty. And so I went over to talk to him, and the first thing he said to me was, I'm so glad you are here to represent Tulsa, which I had never thought of it that way. But after that, that made me proud that I was there to represent Tulsa. And as far as I know, I'm the only broadcaster from Tulsa that has ever been a part of the Olympics. And Brad died this past year, and I was asked to speak at his funeral, and I told that story. So it still means a lot to me today.
Yes. And then, of course, his brother Scott. And then we think of Petty's Fine Foods in Utica Square, which is no longer there. And I have interviewed Scott Petty about the store and that experience.
Great family.
But then, you could have lived in other parts of the country. You worked in New York and Los Angeles. Why did you choose to return to Oklahoma?
I've always believed in the promise of Oklahoma. And I continue to believe in it today. But at that time, I wanted to come back to Oklahoma because this is where my roots were. This is where my family still lived. And I wanted to raise my children here. I looked around at the kind of life that I had here before I left, and this is the kind of education and life that I wanted for my children. And I'm so glad that we did. They both had wonderful experiences here. And even though one lives in New York and one in San Francisco, they still try to come home whenever they can. And I think if they didn't live in those cities, they would come back to Tulsa.
Right.
And I still believe in the promise of Oklahoma, and I look at our state and I see so many possibilities, but I don't like everything I'm seeing today. And I know I can do better, we can all do better together. This state is filled with possibilities. We just need to turn those possibilities into realities. And I still believe and will always believe in the promise of Oklahoma.
What is it you don't like?
I don't like some of the things I see in education happening. I had a public school education. I firmly believe in public school, and I think we need to support our public schools. I don't like all the infighting I'm seeing. One of the things I love most about David Boren when he was our U.S. Senator is that he could work on both sides of the aisle. I don't see much of that today in Oklahoma. And there's no reason not to. I mean, we should be able to find common ground. So many of us, we're in our leadership position, are lifelong Oklahomans. There should be some common ground we can find.
Yeah. And today, with people able to work virtually, and they're being asked to come to Oklahoma by the Kaiser Foundation, $10,000, many have come thinking they were just try it for a year and have stayed. And I think we're probably an area that the rest of the country doesn't know that we are as special as we are. And downtown in that Brady district, how that is booming is absolutely amazing.
Oklahoma is, I think, the country's best kept secret.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that. And when I lived in New York and Los Angeles and Dallas, and people did not know that much about Oklahoma, and I was always so happy to tell them about our state. And Oklahoma's greatest resource has always been its people. And that's why I would really like to see our people come together. And you look at some of the people who are in this state, like a George Kaiser, who's doing so much to elevate, all of the people here. I was happy to be involved somewhat with the Gathering Place. I mean, what a great idea that was. And then his Tulsa Remote. And there are other people like George Kaiser around the state who are doing things. And we need to help these people who are trying to move our state forward.
So you've alluded then to that area of nonprofit. You have done a whole very impressive nonprofit work. What are some of your special ones that come to mind right now? Well,
I've always said, and another reason I came back to Oklahoma was because I wanted to give something back to the state that had given so much to me. And my husband, who was raised in Texas, he has helped me tremendously with some of the work that we have done. He is a visionary, and he has great vision when it comes to especially nonprofit work. And then I had the contacts to be able to work on some of the projects and move some of the projects forward that we were talking and dreaming about. For instance, Catholic Charities. Today, Catholic Charities has an agreement with Walmart, and they get a lot of the oversupply that area Walmart stores, has on hand. And that was one of the things that we worked on first. Catholic Charities needed a way to sustain itself. We helped raise money for a new campus for the organization, but it did need a way to sustain itself. And I had a friend who happened to be an executive with Walmart Corporate, and we asked her if there was some way, we could partner with Walmart. And so today, there are millions of dollars each year come from Walmart and goes to Catholic Charities to help provide supplies, whether it's clothing, food, frozen and fresh food. Anything that Walmart offers and has an oversupply of has been given to Catholic Charities.
That's great.
I mentioned the Gathering Place. We were involved with helping to raise money for that. And then I did 2 interviews with George Kaiser leading up to the opening of Gathering Place. And it aired on Channel 8 here, the pieces. So I was able to help promote that in that way.
Well, I got to say, that's a rarity when George...
He did 2 interviews.
Yeah.
He did 2 interviews leading up to the opening.
I applaud you for that, because he won't do this for me. Some people die when we do this, and he says, if I'm going to interview, I'm not going to do that, he says, because he's afraid of dying if I interview him.
Oh.
But anyway, so I applaud you for that. But you've also been involved in other areas.
Yes, I was chairman of the board of the Pencil Box, which provides school supplies for students in need. And that has been my good friend Nancy Belsley founded that organization, and that has been very successful. And they just built a new facility because the smaller facility they had couldn't hold all of the school supplies that they were getting. So I've tried to not focus on any one area, but just when I saw an area that needed help, I tried to offer, what skills I had or what vision my husband had. We also were instrumental in raising funds for Arts Alliance Tulsa, which I so firmly believe in the arts, and that's one of the things I feel has always made Tulsa so special. You look around at the different arts organizations and groups that we have, and it's just amazing for a small town. One of the things we did with Arts Alliance Tulsa when we were raising funds there, we asked the Warren Foundation for help, and they have a tree farm, and they have provided trees for us to sell at Arts Alliance Tulsa. So you can buy a tree for your yard, and the funds will go to Arts Alliance Tulsa. So we tried to also come up, and this is another area where my husband has been really helpful in coming up with areas that are sustainable, after we're not here to help.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the organizations. I'm chairman of the board of the Oklahoma Hall of Fame now, and that is an organization. It's a statewide organization, and we tell Oklahoma's story through its people, much like you do. And I think that's so significant because think how, if you look at the interviews that you have done or the interviews I did for my Oklahoman show or the people that we've featured with induction into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, that's so inspiring to hear these stories.
Yeah. And I applaud you for wanting to be involved in our community. You could easily have said, all right, I'm going to go to do this and that, but you didn't, and not everybody gets involved. So I applaud you for doing that.
Well, I feel the same about you.
You're in Tulsa, and then do you leave that and begin to host a coaches show? The Dallas Cowboys coaches show. When does that come in?
Okay, that comes in after I leave ABC because, again, I'm looking for a better fit. I was so glad I had the opportunity with ABC, and it was, once in a lifetime opportunity. But it became just more responsibility than I was able to handle with the responsibilities I felt with my family. Mm-hmm. And they were my priority.
And they certainly understood.
Yes.
ABC.
Yes, mm-hmm. Yes.
Who replaced you?
Eventually, Julie Moran replaced me, but that was true. I think that was a couple of years later. Mm-hmm. She had been a host of Entertainment Tonight, and Robin Roberts eventually, I think, also was on Wide World, maybe a little bit after that. Mm-hmm. And she had started at ESPN. Next, you're talking about the Jerry Jones Show.
Mm-hmm. How did that come about?
I laugh because Jerry is such a character. That came about because Jimmy Johnson was the coach of the Dallas Cowboys that first year that Jerry owned the team. And Jimmy knew me from Channel 8 because we also produced. He was at OSU at the time, and we produced the Oklahoma State Coaches Show. So he knew me. He called and said, we're looking for somebody to host Jerry Jones Show, and we need somebody like you because Jerry's never done television before, and he's going to need some, I don't know if he said management, but something along that line. And of course, I didn't know Jerry or really know anything about him, but it sounded like a great opportunity. And Troy Aikman had just been drafted as the number one pick, and he was a good friend of mine and my husband's, Patrick, because he had worked for Patrick in Tulsa when Patrick owned the Miller Beer Distributorship when he was at OU.
Oh.
So we knew Troy and knew Jimmy Johnson, so I said yes to that, and that turned out to be a really fun experience. Jerry was great to work with. He was very humble that year, primarily because they only won one game.
And that was his first year.
And that was his first year. But I'll never forget what he said after they won that one game. He said he had felt like a puppet had just lifted, he felt like a puppet, and the puppeteer had just lifted his head because he could walk down the streets of Dallas now and not be so embarrassed.
And he had followed the legendary Tom Landry.
He had followed Tom Landry, and there was a lot of controversy about Jerry buying the team. He was in a very difficult position, made even more difficult by the fact that the team was so unsuccessful that first year. But of course, then they went on to, I know Troy won 3 Super Bowls, yep. 2 with Jimmy Johnson and 1 with Barry Switzer.
Were you able to coach Jerry Jones? He's been known for saying anything off the top of his head and often getting into trouble. Did you try to say, Jerry, you've got to do this?
I tried, and one of the first things to happen was he was going to be interviewed by Sam Donaldson. I thought, oh no, this is not going to go well because Sam knows, I'm sure, how to get Jerry's goat and will probably do so. And there's just really no telling what Jerry will say. There was a young ABC News reporter, Judd Rose. He's since passed away. But I ran into Judd, and he said, Becky, you need to talk to Jerry because Sam is really going to try to come after him because he does not like Jerry, or something along that line. Or he really doesn't, I don't know what he didn't like, but didn't like the way Jerry was handling things in Dallas. So I tried to warn Jerry, but I think that might have been when he came out with a couple of his more infamous sayings like the cheerleaders were the pick of the litter. That might have been that interview.
Say that again?
The cheerleaders were the pick of the litter. Do you remember that saying? Had I known he was going to say that, I might have warned him that probably wasn't a good idea. I don't think any amount of coaching would have probably kept Jerry from saying some of the things he said, because they were the things that came off the top of his head, and they were the things he was used to maybe saying in Arkansas. I don't know.
Well, it made it compelling to watch, I guess. You never knew what was going to come out of his mouth.
Yes.
And certainly one of the few owners in the NFL who would be interviewed. Most owners stayed in the background and let their coaches do talking.
He wanted to have his own television show.
And he still is out there talking
He's
to
still
this
out
very
there
day.
talking. He's still out there talking. Yes, I'm not sure much has changed in that regard, and I'm not sure Jerry wants to change. So, they did go on to have tremendous success with Troy. I'm certainly happy for the career that he had, and Jimmy Johnson.
So were you there for Super Bowl victories? Were you doing the show?
No, I was not, because by then we'd moved back to Tulsa, and I started my own production company, and I'll get into that because that's kind of the next big phase of my life. We happened to be, this is for diehard Dallas Cowboy fans that will remember, we happened to be in the Bahamas with Troy, and Jimmy Johnson was there. He wasn't with our traveling group, but he was there at the time, and that's when we first heard that Jerry was going to fire Jimmy Johnson. So, and then along comes Barry Switzer. So that was that was a very interesting time to be associated with Dallas Cowboys, and to continue today to kind of see how they've evolved. The next phase of my career, when I was doing the Jerry Jones show, WFAA in Dallas asked me if I would do some pieces for them, because they knew of my work through ABC Sports, and then also because of the Jerry Jones show. And they had a show called Texans, and they profiled accomplished and interesting and successful Texans on the show. And so it was much like if you remember the old Barbara Walters shows, where she featured 3 interviews of interesting people, and they were profile pieces. Phyllis George was one of the people that I interviewed on Texans, and she and I had a lot in common because she eventually went to work for the NFL Today. Not so much as a journalist, but she did more just profile pieces, I think. But anyway, I enjoyed interviewing her. But I came up with the idea. I know Texans are known to talk about themselves. They like to boast. I'm married to a Texan, so I kind of know how that goes.
And his name is?
Patrick Keegan. But in Oklahoma, we're not known to boast. We have more of what I call a quiet confidence. But I started to come up with the idea of, why don't I take this concept to Oklahoma? And at that point, I wanted to form my own production company so I could make my own schedule. And I came up with the idea, like I said, to develop the concept for my Oklahoman show. And I wanted to give something back to the state that had given so much to me. I wanted to inspire Oklahomans of all ages, especially young people. I wanted young students sitting in a small Oklahoma classroom like the one I attended to see that they could realize their dreams. And I wanted to tell stories about people who could illustrate that to them. And so that's when I developed the concept for my Oklahoman show. That lasted for 20 years.
Yes, remarkable. So that was produced by your company?
By my company, Dixon Productions, yes.
So I'm curious about the background. Did you buy equipment and all that? And so your people?
No,
how did that work?
I hired Wintercom,
okay,
which was owned by my friends from Channel 8, Jim Wilburn, who was the top sales executive at Channel 8 when I was there, and Chris Lincoln. So I hired them to do the production. But I sold all the sponsorships and produced the show. They provided a director and camera operators and editors.
So was Channel 8 the station who aired all the programs?
No. Actually, all three stations ended up at some point over the 20 years, but I started with Channel 6.
Okay. Why not 8?
I think I went with whoever made the best
Okay.
best deal
All
for
right,
me.
sure. Way to go.
Best deal for me.
You're a businesswoman, of course.
And the other thing about Channel 6 that made it very good for me was that it also aired in Oklahoma City. And Channel 6 was Griffin Broadcasting, and they owned Channel 6 here and Channel 9 in Oklahoma City.
So they played them on both
It was
stations.
statewide broadcast, yes,
Right.
and I sold it as a the first statewide television program.
So you were a salesman, too, for the program.
Yes, but it was a pretty easy sale because it was it was a new concept. I think sponsors saw the value, and I'm sure you see that in what you're doing, of telling Oklahoma's story through its people. And I've always felt that Oklahoma's greatest resource is its people. I started out with, I'll just throw out a few names. I started with those first few years. Garth Brooks, Ben Johnson, who won an Academy Award,
Yep.
and who was also a rancher and cowboy that my dad knew from all those years of ranching and steer roping.
You interviewed Mickey Mantle.
Mickey Mantle.
Do you have any stories about some of these people? Like Mickey Mantle, what was he like at that point?
He had mellowed. I interviewed him at his golf tournament in Joplin. Mickey Mantle had great stories, and that was the thing. Each of these people had so many great stories to tell. Mickey Mantle told some interesting. I'll tell a couple of his stories. One was when he was in Little League. The field where he practiced and played, there were houses behind it, and this woman always, in one of the houses behind the field, always set her freshly baked pies out on her windowsill to cool, and Mickey kept knocking the pies off the windowsill and would get into trouble from the woman and the coach for doing that. Another story he told was, he was kind of like me. He never wanted to leave Oklahoma. He wanted to stay where he was in Commerce. And he didn't want to go to New York. New York scared him, and he got to New York. He didn't like it, and it was, you can imagine, it was overwhelming for him. And he wanted to leave, and he called his dad and said he was going to come back home. And his dad, who I think Mickey said had never been on a plane before, flew to New York and met with Mickey in his hotel room, and he said, "Look, you're not going to come home. You're going to stay here and see this thing through. I won't let you do this to your career. You can't come home. You stay here." And of course, the rest of that story is history.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it could have gone either way.
Yep.
His dad could have said, "Sure, if you can buy your ticket home, buy it." But
parents are generally, in so many ways, if that's what you want to do, Johnny,
Yes.
if that's what you want to do. And he said, "No, you're not going to do that." But he also knew how talented his son was.
He knew the opportunity.
Right.
Garth, I interviewed Garth kind of at the beginning of he was extremely popular, but he hadn't reached that, that pinnacle that he would later reach. I think this might have been like maybe 92, but it was his first concert in Tulsa. It was at the convention center. And I interviewed him in the dressing room. His mom was there. His wife was there. He had a lot of relatives from Tulsa that were there, and they were all must say they were having a very good time. I'd never seen people having so much fun because they were all enjoying this tremendous success of Garth's. I said, "Do you really realize what's happening to you?" And he said, sometimes we'll be on the bus and the guys and I will kind of look at each other and then we'll just pinch ourselves and say, "Can you really believe what is going on with us?" Mm-hmm. And, and of course, I'm sure they had no idea just what it would lead to.
I always felt as a performer, he was also a great promoter. Lots, as you know, those are two people. The performer is not a promoter, but Garth Brooks, maybe if he hadn't promoted himself as much as he did, who knows?
But he was just such a great personality. He was such an engaging personality. Mm-hmm. What you saw on stage was really kind of what you got, backstage as well. Mm-hmm. I remember asking him, my last question to him was, what do you want these fans to feel when they leave your concerts tonight? These are your fans, your Oklahoma fans. And he said, I just want them to know that dreams really do come true sometimes.
In your preparation for these interviews, like you said, you asked that question. Did you know you were going to ask that question, or did you start interviewing and they just started coming to you?
Both. I would usually have a set of questions that I had written, but as you know from interviewing, interviews can lead you in various different directions. So I never would try to stick to that script. I always knew that it was very important to listen.
Yep.
And to let the interview take you from there. Wilma Mankiller, the first female chief of the Cherokees. What a great story she was. I went to Tahlequah and interviewed her there. She had just had tea with the Queen of England, and she showed me the invitation. The Queen of England invites Wilma Mankiller to tea.
And we have her story on Voices of Oklahoma, and just about 2 months ago I interviewed her husband, Charlie.
Charlie, yes.
Yeah,
I interviewed Charlie that day as well.
Okay.
Yes, Carl Albert. I was able to interview him before he passed away.
Great. Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Speaker of the House, the highest political leader in Oklahoma's history.
Yeah.
He met with John F. Kennedy. This is a story he told. Met with President Kennedy in the Oval Office right before he left for Dallas. And he said that he could still hear the whir of the helicopter as it lifted from the White House to carry him to the airport to go to Dallas. Of course, he had a front row seat on so much of history.
And you had some other names that you interviewed in the Oklahomans. Let's see, like Carrie Underwood, you interviewed her. Anything special about that interview?
I interviewed Carrie Underwood in Norman almost immediately after she had won American Idol. She was there as a part of the American Idol tour. They were performing in Norman that night. I remember that it was that year because my mom watched American Idol. I hadn't watched it that much, but she watched it, and she would always say to me, you need to watch it. There's a young woman from Oklahoma who's really, really good, and I think she might win. So I was really happy that Carrie did win and that I was able to interview her. She was very emotional during that interview because I think it was overwhelming for her, I'm sure. Here she was from Shakota, and she started on this journey that took her, to the top of the entertainment world eventually. But she was very emotional, and I'll always remember the last thing she said in the interview because I asked her what she hoped people would remember about her American Idol experience, and she said, and she started to cry, and she said, I just hope that I made Oklahoma proud. And she was a really beautiful soul, I'll say that. And then I could see that immediately, that she was very thankful and grateful for what had happened to her. And of course, at that time, she had no idea of what was getting ready to happen to her.
She really did make Oklahoma proud.
She really did make Oklahoma proud, yes.
Now, Barry Switzer must have been a story, huh? And
is Barry ever not a story?
Right.
I love Barry Switzer. And I interviewed him twice for my Oklahoman show. And, of course, prior to that, I had known Barry for a number of years because of my work at Channel 8. The first time I interviewed him, it was after he had been let go at OU. I wanted to talk to him about his incredible record and success at OU, but I also wanted to talk to him about how things ended, which, as we all know, was very difficult for him. He's so candid. I mean, you can ask him anything. And I remember we talked about his success, and then we talked about, getting fired at OU. And he said, those people that fired me, that they're like a molecule in the universe. I don't really think about them anymore, and I'm not going to think about them. And I remember another question I asked him was, you got you had incredible success on the field, but you had some criticism about the way you handled yourself off the field. He said, well, what do you mean by that? What did I do? And I said, well, I don't know, wine, women. He said, I like wine. I like women. And he said, I like to have a good time. I'm a fun guy. Those are just some of the things I remember from that. But I was very happy that he was able to have a comeback and go to the Dallas Cowboys and win the Super Bowl. And I interviewed him after that. Mm-hmm. After the Super Bowl win, I went to Dallas. I'm trying to think of some of the more interesting things he said about, there are definitely second acts in life. I just will always think that Barry Switzer, I've said that David Bourne was one of my favorite interviews, but Barry Switzer is right up there too. Mm-hmm. He is back on top in Norman. You go down there and he's like king of the world to everybody there. And I'm really glad to see that.
Yeah.
And to see them. And I think, and I'll give Bob Stoops some credit for that and in bringing Barry back into the OU fold, because he deserved to be, and he's just so beloved down there.
Yes. And I have interviewed him for Voices of Oklahoma, and we talked about his mother taking her own life, and he gets really emotional about that years later. Boone Pickens was in the news recently, and you interviewed him too, didn't you?
I interviewed Boone. Yes, I went to Dallas to his office. I think it might have been somewhere around 2003 or 2004. He's a character. He's a little like Barry in that he's very candid and very easy to talk to. He recently gave, in addition to a significant amount of money to OSU recently, he also gave $2 million to the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and I'm chairman of the board this year. So I was there when Jay Rosser, his representative, gave us the gift of the $2 million. I told the story. I said, well, when I interviewed Boone, he said that he believed that the true measure of a man's wealth can be measured by the number of bird dogs he owns, and he owned like 24 or 34. And Jay, his representative who was there that day, said, no, 43 bird dogs. I said, okay, well, I'm just glad we got the dollars, not the dogs. But he told another interesting story about how he ended up in the field that he ended up in. He was a student at OSU, and he wasn't paying as much attention as he should have been to his studies. And his father called him in, I think maybe it was before his senior year, and said, son, I don't know what program you're on, but I'm on the 4-year program. So after 4 years, that's it for me. I'm not paying for any more of your education. So you either graduate on time or you figure out a way to pay for the rest of your education. And so Boone thought, oh no, I can't let this happen. I really need to graduate on time. So he went to his guidance counselor, and said, we've got to figure out a way I can graduate on time. So the only path they could find to Boone graduating on time was if he went into geology. So he did. Wow. And the rest of that story.
in that moment, quick moment.
In that moment.
Yeah.
He thought on his feet, for sure. Those are some of the memories I take away from that. And it was before I think maybe he had just announced at that time, now I can't really remember the year, of his significant gift that he was giving to OSU, in the first big gift. But I remember that he said, in talking about the amount of the gift, he said, I don't plant small trees. And I don't think Boone Pickens did anything in a small way.
No. Glad you got him. And to be a self-promoter, we have him also on voicesofoklahoma.com.
Good. But like I said, Oklahomans aren't known to boast, but we have more of a quiet confidence. And I could see that come through so many times in my interviews. And the one thing, and I can say this, and like I said, the show aired for 20 years, each and every one of those people that I interviewed, they were so proud to be an Oklahoman. Mm-hmm. And they would talk about that without being coaxed by me. They all still felt strong ties, and many of them had left to pursue their career, like Reba McEntire. She's, and to this day, and I knew her as a child because our dads were both ranchers, and her dad had actually worked on our ranch for my grandfather for a little while. But to this day, and I just saw a piece on CNN the other night, and I knew she had done this, but she opened a restaurant in Atoka. Mm-hmm. And almost everybody who leaves Oklahoma, it seems like they still keep that connection
Is there one more name you can think of that steps out?
David Boren.
You interviewed David Boren, and we have for Voices of Oklahoma. What was your experience with him?
One of my very favorite interviews.
Yep.
And someone who did so much for our state in so many different ways. The first time I interviewed him was in the early 90s, and there was talk of him perhaps running for president. But as we know, he chose a presidency of a different kind and came home to the University of Oklahoma, the very best thing that ever happened to OU, in my opinion.
What I was impressed with him was how shy he was when he was younger. And in college, in a debate, he wouldn't even stand up. And they said, if you don't stand up, you're going to get an F. Yeah.
A very modest man, but so smart.
Yeah.
So smart. Yes, he was one of my favorite interviews, and I always will remember what his wife told me about David. And this was in that first interview before anyone knew, or I'm sure before he even knew he would come back and become president of OU. But she said, at his very core, he is a teacher. If you peel away all the layers of the apple, at its very core, you will see a teacher. And I remember that too, because my daughter was with me. She was in high school at that time, and she was with me on that trip. And when we went to his office for the first part of the interview, he took Jennifer around, and he had so many different types of memorabilia in his office, and he explained in detail to her every one of the, every piece of history that he had in his office. And that was just easy to see his love for teaching.
And he taught a class as he was president.
Yes, he did.
That was important to him to keep doing that. So you throw around president, and you became a president yourself.
Yes.
Tell us.
I am currently president and owner of Airplay Productions. I joined forces with Ed Taylor in the mid-'90s while I was continuing to produce my Oklahoman show. But I became interested in other facets of communications because I didn't know exactly where the industry was going, but I knew it was going in places that we could only imagine at the time. So I went to a telecommunications conference that was held here in Tulsa. I believe the former company Wiltel sponsored it. That company was a part of Williams Communications. And I met Ed Taylor there. I kind of had known Ed and knew who he was, but Ed was a pioneer in satellite and cable communications. And he had recently sold his company for quite a bit of money. And so Ed was retired from the major company that he had because he had sold it and was looking for some new projects to do. And he and I were kind of talking about some different things. And I said, well, I might be interested in working on some of your ideas, depending on what they are. And a few weeks later, I got a call from him, and he said, I have an idea that I think you might be able to help me with. Would you like to talk about it? And I said, yes. And so at the time, his idea was for a satellite project. His wife was ill, but she loved listening to radio programs from around the country, whatever she could pick up. So he wanted to form a network that would feature different radio programs and that we would transmit them via satellite. So we signed, to make a long story short, we signed people like Dr. Laura at the time, Dr. Harvey Rubin, who was a psychiatrist. So some of the different areas that we covered were liberal politics, conservative politics, health, financial. We had different categories. So we worked on this, trying to develop this idea for several months. But along came the internet and audio on the internet. There was a software called Real Audio that was being developed at the time, and Ed switched horses in midstream, as my dad would say, and said, I think we ought to try to put this on the internet. Well, this was a very new concept at the time. There was only one other company putting any audio on the internet, and that was a company in Dallas. There was a young entrepreneur there. He was transmitting via audio basketball, football, a lot of sporting events, and he was giving the programming away to try to build an audience. We were going to sell our programming, and we had a subscription-based product. He had an audience-based product. He wanted to build up his audience. And I got a call one day from this young man in Dallas, and he asked if he could come to Tulsa to talk to us because he was looking for a potential partnership, and also I'm sure he was looking for investment money from Ed. And so I talked to Ed and said, can he come up and talk to us? And he said yes. So he did. His name is Mark Cuban. Mm-hmm. And he and Ed did not see eye to eye on much of anything that day. So we ended up without a partnership, and both companies went their separate ways. A year later, Mark Cuban sold his company for $8 billion to Yahoo. We look back on that. I guess we could kind of laugh about it at the time.
You could have been part of that.
We could have been part of that, yes.
And by the way, I'd like Ed Taylor, I've also interviewed.
Oh,
and
okay.
so I got his story on the satellite world and all. But then, you guys were going worldwide. Did you realize that when you went on the internet? That was worldwide stuff.
Yes. And one of the projects that we did during this period of time that I was most proud of is we joined forces with Harvard University for the first World AIDS Day on the internet. In fact, I believe it was the first webcast live on the internet. I want to say that must have been around 1995 or 6. And we didn't have many listeners, but we had some from far and away. I know there were some from Japan, I believe, and other countries around the world. So I think we had no idea at the time what this would lead to. I had no idea. I'll take that back. I had no idea. But I do remember Ed saying to me one day, and he was such a visionary, and he saw things far and away, things that the rest of us could only dream about. But he told me one time, he said, there will come a day when your entire world will be on your phone. I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, you will watch movies on your phone. You will talk to people on your phone. You will, I forget what all he said, but it was just, something that I could not fathom. But that was his special gift, was his vision. And he was, had so much experience in the world of technology. And his father was in the same field. And I know Ed got much of his knowledge from his father, and he was a voracious reader. Before the internet, every morning, if he didn't come to, there were some days he did not come to the office. And if he didn't come to the office, he would send someone to the office with a pile of newspaper clippings, magazine articles, all for me to read. And they were things that he had read probably just the night before. But that morning I would have a big stack of things to read. He was a great teacher. I learned so much from him. I think he and I were good partners. He would talk about ideas, and he would talk at length about something and give every detail. I was able to, and he credited me with this, but I was able to look at a large piece of information and make it more concise, like for a television broadcast. And he felt like that was one of the talents that I brought to the table for our company.
How fortunate you were to be around him, and he talked about Ted Turner and how CNN and all got launched.
He launched Ted Turner on satellite with WTBS, yes. And I was able to go to a conference in Oklahoma City, and Ted was there, and Ed was not able to go to that, but I went and I was able to talk to Ted about Ed. He had a great deal of respect for him.
We have cable television. We were one of the first ones in America, I believe, because he lived here.
Yes, yes.
In Tulsa.
Ed is a best-kept secret in Tulsa, I think. I know not everybody outside our industry knows about him and the success that he had and the kind of visionary that he was, but Tulsa's very fortunate to have had somebody like him live here all these years, and he's still here.
Isn't it interesting how we've been able to be in this business and see things come along, and then pretty soon they start building websites. And you were so amazed by people watching your webcasts from Japan and all. Remember when they unearthed the Plymouth Belvedere that had been buried?
You were a part of that, I remember, yes.
And I was working with Ackerman McQueen at the time, and Angus McQueen was also one of those people who saw the future, and he said, we're going to do that live. And we got people coming from around the world watching this car being unearthed.
I didn't come from around the world, but I was there. And yes, there were people, I think, that were with us that were from out of town that had come to see that.
And I realized then what a website would do because of all these people who were tuning in. I could not believe that. So that's what helped me understand that what we're doing here today is important and people around the world can listen to it. And we too now get people from around the world listening to Voices of Oklahoma.
So just to sort of wrap up my career thus far, Ed retired in 2013. I bought his company and continue as owner of Airplay today.
And what does Airplay do?
Today, primarily, we are focusing on our on-hold messaging product. We have 7,000 clients nationwide. This was part of a company that Ed bought, probably, I think, 20 years ago. And I have employees that have been with us for 20 years. I know one woman who works with us started with us when she started working when there was shipping to be done, when she was she was a teenager and is still with us today. So we primarily focus on that. We also did video production for a number of years and are not doing as much of that anymore. I am trying to step back a little bit, and so I feel like I have the company in a position that it can be run with or without my full 100% attention, because the people working with us now have been in the on-hold industry for so many years.
Does that make you feel good that at this point in your life you still have something going? It's a business and all?
I still have something going, but I have the flexibility that I always wanted and dreamed about.
You
Of course, now my children are gone.
They're gone?
Well, one lives in San Francisco and one in New York, but I see them as often as I can.
You have grandchildren?
No, not yet.
Yeah. Did you release a commissioned book?
We did publish a book in 2014, I believe, it was the history of the Liberty Glass plant. I wrote the book. I had an employee at the time who had a strong tie to Sapulpa, and she said, would you be interested in helping me put together a book that tells the history of Liberty Glass? She said, I can do the graphics. She was a graphic designer. She said, I can do the graphics if you can do written content. And so I approached it much like I did one of my television specials. I interviewed a number of the people who were still living, who were a part of Liberty Glass. That's why they wanted to do it at that point, because their employees were getting older and they wanted to make sure they were able to capture their stories. So I interviewed the people and wrote their answers much like I'd write an interview. So I really didn't have any other experience in writing something like that. So I went back to what I knew.
You are famous for not having experience and yet going on and do something. Did you find you enjoyed writing? Do you consider yourself a writer? You're a broadcaster?
I love writing. I love writing. That was always my favorite part of broadcasting was writing. I love the creative opportunity writing provides. And that was my favorite part of my Oklahoman show was writing.
You received numerous awards recently. You received the Sadie Adwan Lifetime Achievement Award?
Yes, I've been very fortunate to receive a number of awards. I think when you stay in an industry as long as I have, they have no choice but to give you some of the awards. The Sadie Adwan, yes, for Lifetime Achievement from Women in Communications. That meant so much to me because I was able to work with Sadie Adwan at Channel 8, and she was the first woman general manager, so she was a pioneer, certainly in her own right. She followed Tom Goodgame at Channel 8 as general manager. So that award meant a great deal to me.
In interviewing people, and you go away from it and started thinking about it, was there always that question that you should have asked?
Yes, I'm sure there was over the years, especially after I'd get to the editing process. I would think, oh gosh, I wish I'd asked that. Yes, but I think that's part of, that's just part of being an interviewer, is that there are always going to be things you wish you had asked, because You don't know a person's entire story, obviously, before you interview them, so you can't come up with a specific list that you will always stick to. You have to always, like we talked about earlier, listen and see where the story leads you.
And that always nags me, and it will nag me after this interview. Oh, I should have.
Well, I think we covered.
We did.
I do want to mention one other honor, because I was able to receive Oklahoma's highest honor, and that was from the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and that was certainly
Yes.
the high point of my career was receiving that honor.
Right, and you deserve that. You didn't know it, but you were a pioneer woman, and there are, what do you say to young people today that are interested in journalism? It sure is far different if they want to get into electronic than it was way back then. But what kind of advice do you give them?
That's really hard to say, because I feel like the advice I gave young people earlier in my career is so different than maybe I would say today, because the world has changed so much. And the role of being an employee, and I know this from my children, because things that they tell me that they do, in their work or opportunities that they have wouldn't have been the case when I was first starting out. Early on, I would have said, do whatever your supervisor tells you to do. If they tell you to empty the trash, go empty the trash and do it with enthusiasm. This was back when broadcasting was very hard to get into, and I think it's easier now, but especially for women. I don't think I told the women to empty the trash, but I would have probably said, do what your supervisor tells you to do, as long as it's in line with the role that you're fulfilling at the company. Make your supervisor look good. These were things that I thought I could have probably done a better job at. And now today, I definitely wouldn't say those things.
What would you say today?
That was a lesson I learned from my dad. I think if you want to really break it down to something simple, that's what I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Do we have anything else we want to say? Something that's on your head? You could drive away and say, oh, I should have said.
Well, I would like to say I really appreciate the role that my family played in my career. My husband, Patrick, has been so supportive and has, gone with me on many of my interviews and just helped to support me. My children are the same. They never once said, you weren't here for this, or you criticized me for not being at something, except one time. My son was so disappointed that I wasn't able to attend some of his baseball games because he said to me one time, he said, you go to everybody's games but mine. And that was really an impetus for me deciding I needed to have more flexibility with my career.
Well, you're giving advice to young people when they raise families, how much you paid attention to your own, and it was important for you to be there. So that was an example, too.
I think I had the perfect career had I had no children. But I never got on a plane that I didn't really kind of feel sick at my stomach for leaving them. I grew up on a remote ranch, and I had a very narrow window on the world. And, of course, then I found myself hosting a show called Wide World, and little did I know just how wide the world could be. I remember being in the Netherlands at the World Gymnastics Championships. I was probably around 1987 or 8, and the Soviets would not allow us to make eye contact with their gymnasts because they were afraid we might encourage them to defect. So even while interviewing them, we couldn't make eye contact with them. We couldn't be alone with them. And again, it was because they were worried about their gymnasts defecting, because there had been a couple of high-profile defections at the time. So here I was so naive, I could just see a KGB agent lurking around every corner, ready to catch me if I made eye contact, because that's hard to do, to interview someone and not make eye contact with them. So there were some, certainly some experiences with different countries, different cultures. It was a very wide world.
Isn't it amazing, this ranch you came from, and you did all that? You believe in a higher power, and he knew where this was tracking, and you didn't.
Somebody must have known, because there was no way I could have ever imagined imagine the life that I would eventually lead. I know somebody asked me one time, did you always dream of being a journalist? And I said, never. No, never. I just wanted to be a cowgirl.
What are you most proud of?
I'm proud of the fact that I was able to keep all the balls in the air for as long as I did. I always looked at my job as a juggling act, trying to keep my family going and keep my career on track. And I think I did a good job of paying attention to both of those.
And I think we would all say we agree with you. It sounds that way. Thank you so much for doing this. We've known each other down through the years, and this is obviously the first time we get to really sit and talk with you, and I really admire you and your career and what you did, and the shining example you were. You did things I could never have even dared to do. So thank you, thank you.
It's my pleasure, and I have enjoyed following your career all these years. And I'm glad we're both still here in Tulsa, and both have made it our mission to show that Oklahoma's greatest resource truly is its people.
Yeah, and we're into preservation. You were preserving stories, what you did in Oklahomans, and that's what we do at Voices of Oklahoma. So we're kind of in the same kind of business. Thank you, Becky. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast. Stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.